If we could have everybody stand up, please. So good afternoon, welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm George Hidalgo, club president, and thank you for joining us today. I mean, great attendance, so it's always fantastic seeing all of you here. So we opened today's meeting with the announcement of the death of longtime member George Gialamis, who passed away on May 8th at the age of 82. He joined our Rotary Club in 1974 and was owner of the Gialamis Company. Now, George will be remembered as a developer of our city and a community leader. He served on our club board of directors and was a Paul Harris Fellow. Now, we extend our sympathies to George's family, and our club has made a $100 donation to the Madison Rotary Foundation to establish a memorial fund in George's name. So anyone wishing to make a gift in memory of George can send their gift to the Rotary office. So at this time, and in the moment of tribute, I'll ring the bell and we'll have a moment of silence. Thank you. Let's listen to some opening music. So Ellis Waller will play God Bless America on the bagpipes. So what I'll do, we'll do the patriotic song, and then you can go ahead and sit down at that point, and then we're going on to Heidi Frankson and Casey Olkers. We'll sing Puff the Magic Dragon with Elaine Mishler on piano and Casey also on the flute. I thought it was going to be live, Ellis. Please be seated. And Ellis, if you can raise your hand so everybody knows that you're here. Okay, so outstanding. That's why I actually thought he was going to do it.
Strings and sealing wax and other fancy stuff.
So thanks to our musicians today, and we definitely have a very talented group. And also thanks to Neil Farbach, who helped with the editing of the video for Puff the Magic Dragon. So Neil's doing great work, so I think he's got a second career in retirement. So for connecting all those videos together, it just looks more holistic the way he did it. So thank you very much for the group. So on to announcements. And the first section that we're going to do is the Ask George section. And as president, I get asked a lot of questions, and recently asked me, hey, George, what's the current membership total? Obviously, with the pandemic, where are we right now? And everybody knows that our membership numbers impact the budget, right? So, and now, Rotary year is about to end. Remember, our Rotary year goes from July 1st to the end of June. And so, what exactly is going on with the budget planning? Because as all of you know, the membership has to approve everything that goes on with our budget, especially dues increases or decreases or whatever it may be. So it's a very timely question because last Monday, our board met and approved the recommendations from our Budget and Finance Committee regarding next year's budget. So with that, we've got a person that can answer it in detail. So Dan Larson, who chairs this year's Budget and Finance Committee, will come up and tell us more. Dan?
Thank you, President George. As the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, I'm here to talk to you about our club finances and also talk about a proposed dues increase. Always a popular thing to talk about. Last fall, our board made the decision to revamp our membership dues and meals structure so that the dues are the main source of our revenue to cover operating costs. In the past, the club also relied on prepaid but uneaten meals to help subsidize the cost, but that's no longer the case. The pandemic, of course, has caused a lot of issues with our membership declining. To get to the number that George was after, we're currently at 419 members, and that's a 40-year low. As recently as 2018, we were at 507, and the high was 523 back in 2009. Membership drives our budget, obviously, and that's had a big impact on our budget. This year, we expect a deficit of $2,200 for the year ending June 30th. In order for us to reach break even, we have to be up to 430. Our projection for next year in terms of membership is 420. And it doesn't sound like a big increase, but because of the natural resignations and whatnot, we're going to need to add 50 members to get to that 420. And this year, because of the pandemic, we only added 16. So it doesn't sound like a big jump, but getting 50 members will be a challenge. We continue to work hard to hold expenses down, and Pat and her staff have done an excellent job of consistently staying within the budget. Because the membership is down, we're going to need a small increase in membership dues for this coming year that starts July 1st. Standard members would see an increase of $10 from $780 to $790 per year. Exempt members would increase $10 from $470 to $480. Inactive members would see an increase of $9 from $371 to $380. And life members' dues were increased pretty significantly last fall to $225, so they're going to stay where that is. Even with the proposed increase, we're going to see a projected loss of $6,300 next year. If we don't have an increase in dues, the loss would be about $10,000. We're hopeful that over the next few years, we're going to continue to build membership and get up to around 460. Break even's 430, but if we're at 460, that's a sustainable number that'll allow us to have some room for expenses to go up without having to keep cranking up dues. If we're not able to do that and we stay at closer to 400, we're going to have to really look at drastically cutting expenses and or raising dues or some combination. I also want to remind you that starting July 1st, standard members will be required to buy at least 12 meal tickets each 6-month period. That's 50% of the meetings. The cost will continue to be $18, no increase in that. So standard members will see a charge of $216 for 12 meals on the upcoming dues billing. With the recommended dues increase plus the required meal costs, the standard membership billing for a 6-month period will be $611. That compares to $617.50 last year. So the 6-month number is actually less than it used to be. The key, though, is that if you attend more than half the meetings, then your costs will go up because it's $18 per meal or $20 if you pay at the door. We presented, as George had mentioned, we presented this to the board, and they approved the budget along with the dues increase on May 3rd. There's going to be a link to the budget in Friday's email so you can review it yourself and see the budget in detail. There are also some printed copies of the budget at the registration table if you want to pick one up. The proposed change in dues requires a membership vote, and we'll ask the vote next week. Since we don't have a majority of members attending physically yet, the vote will be electronic. So you'll get an email next Wednesday that asks you to vote on the proposed dues increase. We'll also need to ratify it in person because our bylaws require in-person voting for any kind of change like this. If anyone has questions about the budget, feel free to ask me or Pat. Thank you.
I think when you hear about the increase, I mean, it's a small increase when you think about it. And I think looking at the big picture, when we did the budget forecast for this year, 2020 to 2021, we actually expected to come down to 400 members. So we didn't know how bad the pandemic would be and how our membership would respond. So when you look at it, Dan just said we're at 419. We were budgeting 400, so we did better. I mean, obviously there's people who move away, people who retired, move somewhere else, people who get job transfer and so forth. So normal attrition on membership, it happens. The issue is pretty tough to recruit members when we're not meeting in person, because really it's the vibe that you get just being here and the connections or talking to people beforehand just means so much. If you look at Connect, Grow, and Serve, bottom line is meeting in person means a whole lot. So the great thing, I think we've weathered the worst aspect of the pandemic. I think that when I look at the data, over 95% of our members are vaccinated, so we're pretty safe. We're following the rules. We'll be able to start the meals next week. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, which is, I think, fantastic for all of us. And even though we're projecting 420 in the budget, our hope is that maybe we get 440, 450. The recruitment chair is Ron Luskin, who's done a phenomenal job recruiting people this year. He's got some unbelievable skills in recruiting people to Rotary. And we have 14 or 15 this year? And that was about 13? I think it's like 13 and yeah. So he's modest, but he's recruited, I'm pretty sure, 14, 15 members for our Rotary Club this year. He's definitely done it. And I know Susan Schmitz, you've recruited a lot of people in the past. So now that we're back to normalcy, let's get our recruitment hats and make our club strong. Because remember, we contribute significantly to the Madison community. So if you look at what we sent out, I think it was last week, when we contributed $750,000 to the Madison community. So we are vital to this city, and we mean a lot, not in terms of what we contribute, but we as individuals contribute to our community. So let's continue to do that. So thank you very much. Say again? Yeah, it'll take everyone, and that's one of the challenges that I asked the board to step out. So I'm in the process of trying to recruit someone, Cheryl, and Rob. We got to get someone. Everybody's got to recruit one person over the next two weeks, and now that we're meeting in person, I think we'll be able to rise to that challenge. Because bottom line is a strong club, strong group of Rotarians will make this club strong and make a bigger difference in the Madison community. So with that, let me go on to the next announcement, which is the Rotary International Foundation Fund Drive. If you remember, Mary Donahue kicked off our annual Rotary International Foundation Fund Drive last week. And so she's coming up to give us an update. Mary?
Thank you, President George. It's a little hard to follow that budget conversation and inspire you all to engage with the Rotary International Foundation campaign, but that's just what I'm here to talk to you about today. As you might have heard, 2020 was a little bit of an odd year. And so the International Committee ran into its own challenges as well in terms of just communicating and connecting with other clubs and finding that compelling project that we wanted to engage in this year. So in an overused word, we decided to pivot, which frankly was my only physical activity of all last year. We pivoted to decide that we would partner rather than lead an international project, as we had done with the Change Her Story project in Ghana. And the project that I'm about to tell you about came to us by way of District 6250 Friendship a few years back. If you can see the map, you can see that it is located in Curaçao, Chile. I didn't have the executive version of the black Sharpie, so that's kind of hard to see. Curaçao is located about 50 kilometers west of Santiago. You can see that it is very rural. And Curaçao has no medical facilities of its own to speak of. This also means that it requires extensive travel for any patients who require ongoing care. The mayor of Curaçao, seen here in the red jacket, worked in collaboration with the local Rotary Club and our district, and previously completed a mobile dental clinic. There, you see it there. This particular partnership that we're talking about today focuses on building a rehabilitation center in the community. The municipality itself will provide the facility maintenance, hire and pay the physicians, and that ensures the sustainability of the project long term. The local Rotary Club, with support from clubs in their district, from U.S. clubs, from U.S. districts, and a global grant, is looking for the purchase of the equipment, which comes to about $113,000 US. Our club has made the commitment of $9,000 in funding to this project, which means by the end of this fiscal year, the project should be about 100% funded. This project is a great example of local Rotary Club assessing community needs, collaborating with the local government and other Rotary clubs to develop and complete a sustainable project. And we're very proud of our role. But this is how I remind you of how we're able to play that significant role. Our district requires a contribution of an average of $100 per member to be eligible for those matching dollars for international projects. In order for our club to continue to be eligible for $75,000 in district and international matching dollars, members of our club must contribute a combined total of $45,000 by June 30th. To date, and thank you very much for all who did this, we have 46 members who have participated. We've raised $15,710 toward our $45,000 goal. And we ask that each of you consider making a contribution, sending that check for our Rotary International Foundation contribution, and it leads us to be able to engage in these international projects in the years and months to come.
So thank you very much. Rob Vandenberg is co-chair of our Rotary Scholar Mentor Committee, and he has an announcement. Rob?
Thank you, President George. With Cheryl Whitkey, I'm a co-chair of our Scholar Mentor Subcommittee. We're working with the Rotary Scholarship Committee to find mentors for new Rotary scholars who've requested Rotary mentor support during their undergrad studies. And it's that time of year again. The Scholarship Committee has selected 25 deserving high school seniors who will be offered scholarship assistance. And of these scholars, 14 have requested mentors to support on this journey. And you can just imagine these days, all the stuff students are going through right now. I've heard quite a few stories of that. There are many personal experiences that illustrate the impact we can have on mentors, both as individuals and also as a bridge to the remarkable collective resources we offer as a club. In this Friday's Rotary News, there'll be a 3-minute video of former Rotary scholars who tell us why a Rotary mentor was important to them. I would normally show it now, but I think we're tight on time here, so look for that in the Rotary News on Friday. Becoming a mentor can be a rewarding experience for both you and your scholar, and we certainly hope that you'll consider becoming part of our Scholar Mentor group. 14 Rotarians to become mentors. The matching process is right now by letting the Rotary office know. I think on the Zoom chat function is one alternative. The other is a phone call or an email to the Rotary office. And also, I understand that in this Friday's Rotary News, there's going to be a link that you can click on to say, hey, I'm interested. And I was just talking with someone before the meeting. It's also, if we have more potential mentors than scholars available, that's not a bad thing, because typically during the year we have some turnover, and you know, scholars will be looking for mentors because their mentor has left the club for one reason or another. So please consider this opportunity to make a difference in the life of a Rotary scholar. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. So past President Melanie Ramey has accepted a new role in our club, and she will come up and tell us about a new sponsorship opportunity for members. Melanie?
This is your lucky day. I am going to present you with an opportunity that you cannot afford to miss. As you know, one of the tenets of Rotary is that you cannot use the Rotary meetings to promote your business. Well, as the song says, the times they are a-changing. Beginning in the new Rotary year, July 1st, I am going to offer you a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to promote your business at the Rotary Luncheon. And this is how it will work. And I want you to be sure to understand this is a business, profit or nonprofit business. This is how it will work. What we want to do is to have 2 Rotary sponsors for each lunch. And each lunch sponsorship will cost $50. And you can purchase up to as many as 2 sponsorships in the year. So this is how we will do. If you would like to have 2 sponsorships, maybe one in September, another one in January, that's fine. Or you can say, well, maybe the sole sponsor of one lunch. Good for you. That's $500. So however you choose to do it. So what will you get for your great investment here? You'll get a lot of. First of all, this will be announced at the podium, who the sponsors are for this meeting. And then on the great silver screens will be your picture and your company. And everybody will know who you are. In addition, you will be able to greet Rotary, have a special badge identifying you as the sponsor of the luncheon that day. So this is a great, great opportunity. One of the things that you need to think about, though, is that this comes to the Rotary Club. And the Rotary Club is a 501. This is not theoretically a tax-deductible situation. But if this comes out of your marketing budget, some other budget for your business, then it will come out as a business expense, so it ends up being the same. So you say, well, Melanie, I don't have a company. You know, I would like to do this. I don't have a company. Well, that's okay. You've got something. You've got your name. We got your picture. You used to have a classification. If you're retired, you know, that's all right. We will also be able to promote you and what you're doing. So this is also a good opportunity to get to know your Rotarians, your fellow Rotarians better, and to know what they do when they're not here having lunch with you. You know, ever since I have been thinking about this project, I've been having visions. And I can just see, like Greg Tipple, GI Supply, Marv Levy, Phillips Distribution Company, Beth Prohaska, Potter Lawson Architects, Oscar Morales, Omega School. I can just see these just before my eyes, and I'm sure others are going to be coming into view. So today, for you to help me make my visions a reality, I will be out here in the hall signing you up for the week that you would like to have. And if you're watching this virtually today, all you have to do is go in the chat room and say, Melanie, I want to be a sponsor, and you can be sure hearing from me.
Thank you, Melanie. So on to birthdays. We have birthdays celebrated with humor and wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. We also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to $100 for our club's Synergy Scholarship Fund. So May 9th, Renette Maurer. May 9th, Janet Pirano. May 9th, Bob Shoemaker. May 11th, Rob Stroud. Pastor John, please stand up. Okay, outstanding. May 12th, Larry Konopaki. May 14th, Ben Blagogi. May 15th, Ellen Carson. May 15th, Deborah Cronmiller. May 15th, Alan Ebert. And also May 15th is Walt Stewart. So anybody else besides John that's here? Okay. So thanks to our celebrants for the contribution to Madison Rotary Foundation. Please join me in wishing them happy birthday. And Joe Loinas will play Happy Birthday on the cello. Congratulations. Thank you. So I was going to go to members in the news, and we have a lot, but we are short on time, and we'll go on to our program, so bear with me. Our speaker today is Dr. Angela Janis, who is a psychiatrist of Mendota Mental Health Institute in Madison. Previously served as the chief medical officer for Leafline Labs, one of 2 medical cannabis companies in Minnesota, and has been providing cannabis education for over a decade. In addition to cannabis, her clinical interests include women's health care, health disparities, and harm reduction. Now, cannabis has seen a rapid increase in the last decade, with many states legalizing it for medical or recreational purposes. And I wasn't aware that, I guess we're surrounded by states that have done that already, and she'll talk more about that. But today, Dr. Janis is going to tell us the facts about cannabis and help us separate fact from the myth. So those who are business people, maybe it's a profit-making opportunity. Who knows, right? We look forward to your presentation, Dr. Janis, and we have made a contribution to Rotary International Poly Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking to us today. I also want to mention that we will have a Q&A with our speaker at the end as time allows. And if you're watching online, please use the Zoom chat, and I'll be watching for questions. We'll also obviously be taking questions from the live audience. So let's welcome Dr. Janis to our podium.
Hello. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm really excited. In fact, I haven't been around this many people in a long time, and it's just so uplifting to be around other humans again. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about just the basics of cannabis. As I like to say, this is just the high points of cannabis, pun intended, because we got a very short period of time to talk about a lot of information. And this is something I could talk all day about. So at the end, I'm going to give you my contact information. So any lingering questions, questions that come up later that we don't get to, please contact me. I would love to talk to you about this at any time. So just a little bit more about my background. As I mentioned, I currently work at Mendota Mental Health. I am president of the Wisconsin Psychiatric Association and a distinguished fellow of the APA. I've been doing this for over 10 years, and somewhere in the middle of that, I also worked as chief medical officer for Leafline Labs, which was one of the 2 medical cannabis companies in our neighbor, Minnesota. So I'm going to start with the very basics. What is marijuana? Marijuana, really, what we're talking about is a plant called the cannabis plant. And within that plant, there are different chemicals. We're mainly talking about cannabinoids. Those are the main chemicals that we think of in the plant, like THC, which is the one that gets you high, or CBD, which you've probably seen all over that people are taking now. One thing I wanted to mention, though, you might see sometimes, this is, I said the cannabis sativa plant. Sometimes you'll see if you go to the dispensary, things will say indica or sativa or hybrid. It has to do with different species of the plant. The truth is, at this point, there are no purely cannabis indica plants. There are no purely cannabis indica plants. It's all hybrid. That's just one of the keys that you know that you're talking to someone who's maybe not basing their information on science, is if they talk about differences between sativa and indica, because that really is not an actual distinction anymore at this point. But there are lots of different cannabinoids in a plant, and each strain of plant, each different type of plant and different hybrid may have different concentrations of those. The two main ones are THC and CBD, but in that plant, you may have up to 80 or 90 different cannabinoids in different concentrations. That's one of the things that makes it really hard to, one, study the plant, because there's so much heterogeneity between the species, and also how to dose it. Because if I tell you to take 5 milligrams of THC, what else are you getting along with that? So it makes it difficult. My font got a little mixed up here, but what do these things actually do? So it turns out in your body, you have receptors called endocannabinoid receptors. We have molecules in our body that look very similar to THC and CBD, called our endocannabinoid system, and they hit certain receptors in your body. Well, THC and CBD have impact on those receptors as well. And through that process, THC, as I mentioned, is the one that kind of gets you also psychiatrically or psychotropically high. But it also is what causes decreased pain, increases appetite, decreases nausea, helps you sleep because it makes you sleepy. And then CBD is not psychotropic. It does not cause any high. It is not addictive. It really doesn't have sort of cognitive side effects, but we think that it probably decreases pain, decreases inflammation, does work as an anti-epileptic, and probably has some anti-anxiety effect. One of the things that I do mention, though, is CBD actually kind of counters the impact of THC. So THC goes in your body and kind of fits like a key in a lock to that receptor. CBD actually comes along in the receptor and changes the receptor so THC doesn't fit as well. So that's just another kind of thing. If somebody is sensitive to THC, sometimes CBD might be a better place to go, or adding in some CBD might be a way to make the THC a little more tolerable for people. So in the interest of knowing all the terms and what's out there, in addition to just the cannabis that you can buy at the dispensary or illicitly on the street, there are a few pharmaceutical forms of cannabinoids. So there's Marinol Syndrose, which is a synthetic THC, Sesame, also a synthetic THC. Sativex, which is actually a combination of THC and CBD, is available in most countries, so Canada, Australia, New Zealand, most of Europe. Interestingly, is not available in the United States, but it's another one that you see around the world. And then just a couple years ago, Epidiolex is a GW pharmaceutical that is approved for seizures, certain types of seizures. And this is interesting because all those other ones I talked about were synthetic cannabinoids. So dronabinol looks just like THC, but it's not in a plant. It's made in a lab. And that's the only difference between THC and dronabinol. Epidiolex is different because that CBD is actually whole plant derived. So GW Pharmaceutical grows the cannabis plant and derives the medication directly from that plant. So that's kind of a sea change in the cannabis pharmaceutical industry to see that happening. Now, if you do go to the dispensary, it just gets more and more complicated, though, because cannabis itself is available in a lot of different forms. And I think that's what we're seeing as we're seeing the legalization and the commercialization, is that, of course, that brings in, I would say, ingenuity into the system and sort of creates opportunities for people to create products that weren't there a few years ago. That's nice for consumers because they get all sorts of different options. The flip side of that is that the consumer market is outpacing our knowledge of necessarily what impact those products have on people and how they might be different from things that you had smoked in the 70s versus vaporized in the 2000s. But as you can see, we have flower, which is actually the flower of the plant. So when people talk about bud or, just what smells skunky. That's the flower of the plant that people smoke. But they've taken that, and so you don't have to smoke it anymore, and turned it into a whole bunch of different options to use. So there are concentrated forms that you can vape, waxes, oils. Edibles are a very popular and increasing way to consume this. So there are gummies, there's chocolates, cookies. I saw an ad last week for Cinco de Mayo. There was taco seasoning with THC in it. So, I mean, they are really thinking outside the box here. Tinctures you can put under your tongue, so if people need a faster route. Nasal sprays. So, and one thing I actually didn't put on there, but is very important, topicals. So a lot of people with arthritis and things like that have an option that does not go in your system at all, but still provides some of that pain relief. The biggest difference in the how you take it is the onset of the effect. So if you smoke something or you vaporize something, put it in your lungs, it goes straight into your bloodstream, ready to go. You're going to get peak effect like a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes. You're as high as you're going to be. If you eat it, if you take that gummy, it's got to go through your stomach, it's got to go get digested a little bit by the liver, and then get back into your bloodstream. And that process takes a lot longer. It takes an hour or two to really reach peak effect. And again, why that's important is that it's really hard to dose because you take something and you don't know for an hour or two how you're going to feel. And the problem is sometimes people might take more than they intend and then have a more intense experience than they should. So the advice for edibles is always, always, always start low, go slow, just be very, very careful. There was a fairly well-known author of the Washington Post, who when Colorado first legalized, she did the exact opposite. She went and got a hotel room and ate an entire chocolate bar and then wrote about how she had a terrible experience and said, well, I could have told you that probably would have been a terrible experience, but so don't do that. And as we mentioned, we are getting surrounded. Wisconsin is really sort of lagging behind every other state when it comes to cannabis policy. So medical cannabis is available in 35 states. And it's fully legalized in 15 states, plus all of our territories. So Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., Guam, the Marianas Islands, Virgin Islands, all of our territories. This map shows a combination of fully legal medical programs and decriminalized, which means that there are no legal penalties for possession. The white states are the ones that cannabis is still fully illegal. And those are actually decreasing over time as well. So as we mentioned, we got Michigan is fully legal, Illinois is fully legal, Minnesota has a medical program, but has legislation that they're likely going to legalize fairly shortly. But even that number of white states is getting less and less. So Alabama just passed medical cannabis through their legislature this week. Louisiana just did a decriminalization bill that they passed through their House today. Texas actually passed an expansion of medical cannabis and a decriminalization bill through their House a couple weeks ago. So the number of white states on there is going to quickly shrink to zero, and I think we might be one of the last ones. And a timeline, we kind of think that cannabis has gotten really popular in the last few years, which is true. This actually only goes up to 2018. But just to put it in perspective, we've actually had medical cannabis in this country for 25 years. It was 1996 that California went that way. And if you think of how many people live in California, actually like 20% of the population has had medical cannabis for 25 years. So this is no longer like a new experiment or something that we don't have a lot of experience with. We're getting a lot of data. And then we start to see the white ones are where full legalization started to happen, and that was 2012. So even that, we're starting 9 years of data to sort of see what this is. That's one of the advantages of being last, is we get to learn from all the other things that all the other states have gone through. And before I sort of get into the risks, the benefits, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I did want to put a caveat. We are behind on our cannabis research. Cannabis has all of these different regulatory barriers that are required to research it. So not only do you have to get FDA approval, you have to get DEA approval. It's the only drug where the National Institute on Drug Abuse has to provide the supply. And what has happened over the course of decades is that they have largely not given a supply of cannabis for any study, especially the studies that are trying to look for the benefits of cannabis. They give it to a very small amount of people. Of those studies that they choose to give the cannabis to, 96% are looking for cannabis harms, only 4% looking for the benefits. So systematically, and again, the National Institute on Drug Abuse is not a medical agency. They are not a scientific organization. Their whole purpose is to stop drug abuse. So there may be a conflict in that. Just for comparison's sake, we actually do studies here at UW on MDMA, which is otherwise known as ecstasy. We just had an article published today in Nature Medicine looking at MDMA for PTSD treatment, but it's a lot easier to study ecstasy and psilocybin, which we do here, than it is to study marijuana, which a lot of people are using. So because of that, again, we're way behind. I don't have as much good data and information as I should. But the flip side of that is I have a lot more data on the harms, which is actually reassuring because we've done a lot of research on that, and I can tell you a lot more comfortably about the safety profile than sort of maybe where it's going to be most helpful for your pain. But why do people use medical cannabis? Where we have the most evidence, luckily, where we have the most evidence matches what most people are using it for. So the things that we have the biggest evidence for is pain, muscle spasms, and chemotherapy associated nausea, vomiting, cancer patients, end of life. And then CBD specifically for seizures. So I pulled out the table there is actually from the Minnesota medical program, but it mirrors national data. And Minnesota, their medical cannabis program is probably the most restrictive in the country, but they also keep really great data and have a ton of information to reference. So I loved their site is all available online. So they have this kind of broken down by indication, and you can see that pain, post-traumatic stress disorder, muscle spasms, cancer incorporate the vast majority of people. And those numbers add up to over 100 because some people have multiple indications. The one that is up there that I did not mention in terms of good data was PTSD. PTSD is actually included in all but 2 states as an indicated condition. We don't have great data that it works. We actually have conflicting data. What we have is a ton of anecdotal information from patients with PTSD that include a lot of veterans who have said that it is helpful. And in PTSD specifically, the flip side of that is that we do not have any great treatments. I, as a psychiatrist, actually do not have any medications that will necessarily treat your PTSD. So that creates sort of this perfect storm where we're trying to treat people with a very debilitating disorder. We don't have a lot of options, so we're willing to use a few more experimental things. But the data is still really not there, but the PTSD is one of the top indications in the country. The pain, I will just put in a caveat there. Again, there's good data that it works for pain. I think it works specifically best for neuropathic pain, like nerve pain, diabetic neuropathy, things like that. And again, it's that same situation where we don't have great meds to treat that. You know, we sometimes use, you may have heard of gabapentin or Lyrica, which is another controlled substance, but we just don't have pain meds to treat neuropathic pain. Opioids, things like that do not work for them. So when somebody has pain, we're more willing to try some things to alleviate that pain. But there is some evidence it works in other types of pain as well. It's not going to take away your pain like an opioid, like a Vicodin or an Oxy. But on the other hand, the side effect profile and the safety of cannabis is actually much better with cannabis than it is with opioids. If Cheryl agrees with me. So now we'll flip over to the risk a little bit. This is another one of my big flashing lights. If you hear somebody trying to teach you about cannabis and they say nobody is addicted to cannabis, don't listen to what they have to say because that is true. There is a risk of dependence, there's a risk of abuse. The issue, though, with cannabis specifically is it's less than other substances. There are people, though, we always need to, I think, normalize the fact that some people are going to have issues with cannabis and there always needs to be treatment available. And I worry with that message, no one gets addicted, that pushes people to feel like they can't get the treatment that they need, and it stigmatizes their individual experience. So I think it's very important that we talk about that. But in terms of its actual risk profile, again, it's less likely to cause dependence than some of the other things. That dependence rate means of all people who take this substance, what percentage are going to become dependent on it? Tobacco, there's nothing more addicting than nicotine in the world. heroin, cocaine, alcohol, but caffeine, cannabis, they're all down on the lower end. Again, another point to take home here, though, is that the earlier anybody starts using a substance, the more likely they are to become dependent on it. So any children, youth, the younger you are, that rate of dependence goes up. So people under 18 who start using cannabis, their risk of dependence goes up to about 16%. And that's true for all substances. And that's why youth use is really the primary thing we want to look at and we want to focus on. Oh my goodness, I only have 2 minutes left? Okay, I got a boogie. Youth use is not going up in states that have medical marijuana. So far, we haven't seen it go up in states that have legalized. That's the most important thing to me, take home. There is a connection with psychosis, especially younger people who have a family history should not ever use cannabis, and definitely should not use it probably until their late 20s. But that's another one that I say, if people tell you that there's no link with psychosis, that is absolutely not true. There is a very clear link. It's very mediated by family history. So again, if you have any relative who has psychosis, kids should not be using cannabis, especially no kid should be using cannabis, but if you have a family member. Pulmonary concerns, I think that's a big one. I just mentioned there's a lot of ways you can not smoke it, but we haven't seen it associated with any lung cancer. In fact, we haven't seen it associated with any other cancer except a very rare testicular cancer in some young men that doesn't happen very often. But no other cancers like head and neck, things that are associated with smoking, we haven't seen the same things with cannabis. There may be some cardiac issues. We're still working that out a little bit, but maybe something like right after you use, on the risk of shoveling snow or sexual activity kind of puts a little bit more stress on your heart. And you should not drive with any substance at all, ever. And just in our state, to make specifically the point that driving impairment is worse when you mix substances. So any substances you add together, nothing impairs your driving worse than alcohol. Alcohol plus anything else is worse than everything else. So do not drive with cannabis. That's individual too, about how long that may be and whether you took a gummy and it's going to take a few hours, but definitely never ever mix substances and drive. I think that's where I'll end it, just in the interest of time. But again, there's my information, so please send me any questions, anything that comes up, whatever you guys would like to discuss. Again, I've got all kinds of information that will bore you all day about cannabis.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have several questions here. There's one online from Martha Sullivan, and her question is related to longitudinal impact on children of women that have had heavy marijuana use during pregnancy. What does the science tell us?
Good question. Again, this is one of those things that's really difficult to study because we don't ever dose pregnant women with something. And the other thing is that we also know smoking can cause some gestational problems, and so we don't know if that carries on with edibles and things, probably associated with low birth weight and preterm birth.
Excuse me, before I give the microphone here, your email address, it's hard to see if there's a dot between Angela and Janis, is there?
Oh yes, angela.janis@DHS, that's the Department of Health Services, .wisconsin.gov.
Hi, thanks so much for this great presentation, Dr. Janis. Can you talk a little bit about why you got into this area of research? Was there something about your practice that drove you to look into this?
Yeah, it actually was the connection with psychosis. I'd say we really started to see that link come out in the research maybe like 12, 13 years ago. And I started seeing some young patients in my practice who were becoming psychotic after using cannabis. So I started doing talks at the psychiatry department on cannabis and psychosis. I got in front of an audience and realized nobody knew the basics of cannabis. And that's because in our medical education, we do not teach anything about cannabis. Like even just what I told you, we don't get that. So I kind of took a step back and just started, for the last decade, I've been giving people, here's what marijuana is, because that's where we need to start to have the conversation.
I have heard that the cannabis that we have today is different than that cannabis I heard about in the 70s. And I'm curious to know if states are regulating potency and the nature of what is being produced commercially.
Sure. So far, they are not. That conversation, I think that is a fairly new conversation on the scene. So it's started to come up, like there was a bill in Florida, but I think it just died, but they were talking about limiting potency. The question is there, what's the risk of increased potency? And we don't really know yet. I'd say the only evidence we really have so far, again, you have to titrate your dose. You don't want to, it's just like if you have a vodka and a beer, you're not going to drink the beer at the same rate as you drink the vodka. It's kind of like the vape and the flour. But there is a little bit of evidence, again, not great studies, but a little bit of evidence that higher potency THC may increase that psychosis risk. So that's the only thing we've seen is probably the most problematic. So we're having that discussion, but no states have enacted potency limits yet.
It seems ironic to me that in Wisconsin, where alcohol is such a strong social and political presence and economic presence, that, cannabis isn't. Is there any suggested correlation between those two contrasting situations?
I think there are a lot of conspiracy theories on both sides. In certain states, like the Tavern League and lobbying has really jumped on board to join with cannabis, and I think is another place they might be able to have an opportunity. In some places, maybe they've seen it as a competitor. If you look at some of the data, again, it's hard to study this, but what they did is they looked at retail alcohol sales in states that had legalized using grocery scanner codes, and found that alcohol sales dropped a little bit in states that were legalized. So again, some people will say that's why we'll never have it here because there's but I don't think it's that impactful, but that's what the data tells us.
Thank you. One more question here, and the question is related to, is cardiovascular risk as great for edibles as for inhalation?
Excellent question. I think that's what we're running into with all of our research. All of that data is probably it's older. A lot of our marijuana research is actually from the 70s or 80s when everybody was smoking it. And as I said, smoking has its own risk. So I do not know. Potentially, maybe not.
Okay. Final question is, how is CBD oil legal to sell in Wisconsin?
Through two ways, actually. So CBD, if it is derived from hemp, is legal at the federal level through the Farm Bill. The federal government did that, so that is legal. Prior to that, Wisconsin had actually enacted a CBD-only bill that we could do through the FDA, an investigational drug permit. But now we don't have to do that because the Farm Bill made it federally legal, as long as it's derived from hemp.
You mentioned about federal government. So right now, the federal government, the states are out of sync. And I know that you can go into business, but then being able to deposit in banks is an issue, which is causing armed robberies and so forth in other states that have enacted this. You see with the Biden administration, there being almost a congruence with what the states are doing and what the federal government will not allow.
Yeah, and there are two big federal bills to watch. Senator Schumer, who's the leader, has really said that he wants to legalize cannabis as his primary focus, like one of his primary focuses. So he and Cory Booker are working on a bill which should take care of some of that. At the same time, knowing that that might take a little while, there is something called the Safe Banking Act, which doesn't legalize marijuana, but what it does is align our federal laws that they can use the banking system and not have to deal in cash, have access to all that, and then make all because right now, cannabis companies, they have to pay huge taxes and they can't deduct all their business expenses, so it makes it very difficult for them. So they're trying to do some of that business. So that's the Safe Banking Act. One more.
How do you treat dependence? And is there medication-assisted treatment or any way to address it when you see dependence?
Right, sure. It's a lot of behavioral therapy because there is not a medication. There's very limited and conflicting evidence on gabapentin. I personally try gabapentin in people because I feel like it provides some of the same anxiolytic effect, but there's no med.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much.
So, very interesting topic, that's for sure. Thank you everyone for attending, and we are adjourned.